My name is Lucas, and I'm 22 years old. Growing up, I lived in a house where love and fear seemed to live side by side, always at odds with each other. My mother, Amelia, was the sweetest, kindest person I knew. She always treated me with such care, made pancakes on Sundays, and told me that I could be anything I wanted to be in life. I have vivid memories of her warm hugs and how she would read to me before bed when I was younger. She was my safe space. On the other hand, there was my father, Robert. He couldn't have been more different. He was strict, aggressive, and controlling. I don't know what drew my mother to him, but I always had this feeling that she stayed with him out of fear. Since I could remember, Robert treated me as if I was a burden. If I came home with a bad grade, he'd scream at me, calling me worthless. If I broke something by mistake, he'd slap me on the back of the head and tell me I was good for nothing. It wasn't just me he treated this way. He was equally horrible to my mother. He would call her names, push her around, and I remember once seeing her in tears, a bruise on her arm. I was too young to help her, but I promised myself that one day I'd get her out of that situation. When I graduated from high school, I started working at a small hardware store just a few blocks away. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it paid enough to help out with the bills. In the beginning, everything seemed fine. My mom was proud of me, and Robert seemed content because I was contributing by putting part of my paycheck on the table. But over time, things began to shift. Robert started asking for more and more of my money. First, it was 60%, then 70%, and eventually, he demanded 90% of what I earned. I didn't speak up because I was terrified of him. If I refused, he would explode with rage, his face turning red, yelling at me and throwing things. One time, he grabbed me by the neck and told me, "If you don't bring in money, you're no longer my son." I gave in and handed over the money, even though it left me with almost nothing to live on. But there was something I kept hidden deep inside me, my dream. I wanted to start my own business. Ever since I was a teenager, the idea of being my own boss, of building something from the ground up, and proving to both the world and myself that I had value, fascinated me. So, I began saving in secret. I hid whatever little I could in an old tin can under my bed. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Every dollar I saved felt like I was one step closer to breaking free from this nightmare. Then one night in October, everything came to a head. I had worked a double shift at the hardware store and was completely exhausted. But that night, I had been paid. When I got home, my father was sitting on the couch, a beer in his hand with the TV blasting at full volume. As soon as I stepped inside, he looked at me and said, "Where's my money?" I told him I couldn't give him as much that month because I was saving for something important. He looked at me with disgust and sneered, "Saving for what? You're a fool. For your stupid dreams?" I took a deep breath, and for the first time, I stood up to him. "I'm starting my own business, Dad. It's always been my dream, and I need that money to get started," I said, trying to sound firm, though my heart was racing. He laughed at me, this cruel, mocking laugh that made me feel as small as a speck of dust. "A business? You? Don't make me laugh, Lucas. You're a joke. You're not going to amount to anything in life. Stop dreaming and give me the money you owe me." I stood there, my heart pounding, but then I said something I had never said before. "No, this time I'm not giving you anything." The atmosphere in the room shifted in an instant. Robert stood up from the couch, like a raging bull. "What did you say?" he growled. "I said no. I'm not giving you my money. It's mine, and I need it for my business," I said, my voice stronger than I'd ever imagined it could be. His face turned purple with anger. He began screaming at me, calling me an ungrateful son, accusing me of ruining everything for him and my mom. The rage was so intense I could barely breathe. My mom, who had been in the kitchen, ran in and tried to calm him down. "Robert, please don't do this. Lucas is working hard. Let him follow his dreams," she begged, her voice shaking, but he wouldn't listen. He shoved her against the wall and yelled, "Don't you dare tell me what to do, Amelia." She fell to the floor, crying. I wanted to help her, but my father grabbed me by the arm and dragged me toward the door. "If you're not going to help with the bills, then get out. Now, go," he shouted. I opened my mouth to protest, but before I could say anything, he threw me out of the house with such force that I almost lost my balance. Then he grabbed my belongings, my backpack and a pair of shoes, and threw them out the window. "Don't come back, you loser!" he yelled, slamming the door behind him. I stood there in shock, the cold night air biting at my skin. My mom was still crying inside, but I couldn't do anything to stop it. That was the first time I'd ever truly been on my own. I quickly grabbed the tin can where I had saved up my money and counted what I had. There was about $500 in it. Nothing big, but it was everything I had to start over. That night, I walked to a cheap hotel a few blocks away. The place smelled of mold, and the sheets were worn, but at least it had a roof over my head. I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, reflecting on everything that had just happened. I was angry at my father, but I was also angry at myself for letting him control me for so long. I made myself a promise. I was going to succeed. I was going to build my business, and one day I would get my mom out of that house. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I was determined. The next day, I rented a small room in a cheap neighborhood. It wasn't much. Bare, cracked walls, a window that wouldn't close properly. But it was mine. Then, I sent my mom a message. "I'm okay, Mom. I've moved into a place close to the market. This is my new address. I love you." I didn't want her to worry, though I knew she would spend the whole day thinking about me. That's when I pulled out a notebook from my backpack and began writing down my plans. I'd always been fascinated by technology, and I thought maybe I could build an app that would help small shops sell their products online. I'd seen how the store owners at the hardware shop struggled to reach more customers, and if I could create something simple and affordable, it might just work. 2 days later, my mom showed up at my door with a plastic bag. Inside was a container of my favorite food, rice with chicken. "I made this for you, my dear. I don't want you to go hungry," she said, tears in her eyes. I hugged her tight. "Mom, you're the best. I promise you, when I'm a millionaire, I'm going to get you out of that house and give you everything you deserve." She smiled, gently stroking my face. "I believe in you, Lucas. I always have." That moment with my mother gave me the strength to keep pushing forward. Every time I saw her, I could feel the weight of her sacrifices and the hope in her eyes. Even when she came over with bruises on her face or arms, trying to cover them up with a smile and saying, "It's nothing, my boy, don't worry," I could see the truth behind her words. My father was still hurting her, even if she didn't say it outright. And that just fueled my determination to succeed, not just for me, but for her too. The very next week, I decided to take the plunge. I started using the public library's computers to learn how to build an app. I had no experience with coding or programming, but I found some free online courses and threw myself into learning everything I could. I would spend hours at the library, writing down notes in a notebook, working through tutorials, and then heading back to my tiny room to try out what I'd learned on my old, slow phone. My head would hurt from staring at the screen all day, but the more I learned, the more excited I became about the idea. During the day, I returned to the hardware store to ask if I could work part-time. I still needed to make enough money to pay rent and eat, but I needed time for my dream too. My boss, Mr. Tony, agreed to let me come back, though he cut my hours down so I was working fewer days. The pay was lower, but it was enough for the basics, and I could focus on my app when I wasn't at the store. The next couple of months were brutal. I barely slept, eating mostly rice and canned tuna, trying to save every penny. I would often feel dizzy from the lack of rest and from staring at the screen for hours. But despite all the sacrifices, my vision was starting to come together. I had an idea for an app, a simple, user-friendly platform where small shops could upload their products, set prices, and process orders from their phones. I decided to call it Shop Easy. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, but it had the potential to help these small businesses gain visibility and increase sales without needing to hire a tech team or spend a fortune. I reached out to an old friend from high school, Kevin, who knew a little about programming. I told him about my idea, and at first he laughed at me. "You're out of your mind, Lucas. But hey, I'll help you. You know, if we ever get rich, I want a piece of the pie," he joked. I agreed, and we started working together, Kevin on the coding side and me on the business and marketing side. We worked like crazy, meeting whenever we could. Kevin at his house with his laptop, and me at the library. We sent messages back and forth, tweaking the app to make it easier to use and adding features like a search function and payment processing. There were a lot of late nights and failed attempts, but slowly our app started to take shape. After about 2 months of hard work, we finally had a basic version ready. It was rough around the edges, but it worked. The next step was testing it out with a few real businesses. So, I went to some local stores to pitch my idea. The first one was Mr. Tony's hardware store. I showed him the app on my phone and explained how it could help him sell products online without needing to open a whole new website. He looked at me like I was crazy. "Are you serious, Lucas? People buy tools online?" he asked, squinting at the screen. "I think so," I said. "Just try it for a month. It's free for the first month. See how it goes." He hesitated, but eventually agreed. A week later, he called me. "Lucas, I sold 40 hammers through that app. How much do you want for it?" he asked. That moment felt like a turning point. I told him the price, $50 a month, and he paid me in cash on the spot. That wrinkled bill was the first money I'd ever earned from my own idea, and it felt like gold. I was on my way. I started reaching out to other businesses in the neighborhood, talking to shop owners and explaining how Shop Easy could help them. Some said no, others said they'd think about it, but a few signed up. In the first month, I had 6 clients, and I made around $200. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going. The best part was, I was getting real feedback from customers and business owners, which helped me improve the app. As the weeks passed, ShopEasy began to grow. I used the money I made from my customers to improve the app, adding features like a payment system so customers could pay directly through the app. Kevin and I worked long hours to figure out how to make that work, joking that if we didn't succeed, we'd end up taking payments in potatoes. But we eventually figured it out, and the app started to take off. I had more customers, and the money started coming in. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to cover my rent and basic expenses. I decided to quit my job at the hardware store and focus full-time on ShopEasy. Kevin and I rented a small office space. It was just a dingy room with a squeaky chair and a window overlooking an alley, but it was ours. We used the money we made from the app to buy a few basic things: a desk, a chair, and some computers. It was modest, but it felt like a step in the right direction. In just 2 months, I had 15 clients using ShopEasy, and I was making around $1,000 a month. I rented a small apartment. Nothing fancy, but it was my own space. I started feeling more confident in myself and my dream. I knew this was only the beginning. The idea that had seemed so far-fetched only a few months earlier was now becoming a reality. But things weren't perfect. Every time I saw my mom, she would tell me how much she missed me and how proud she was of me. But sometimes she would show up with bruises on her face or arms. When I asked her what happened, she'd brush it off, saying it was nothing. But I knew the truth. My father was still hurting her. I promised myself that no matter what, I would work harder. Not just for me, but for her too. One day, I was sitting in my tiny office, feeling proud of what I had accomplished so far. The phone rang, and it was my mom. She was crying. "Lucas, he came over," she said, her voice trembling. "Your father, he was yelling, breaking things, and insulting me again. I don't know what to do." I felt a wave of anger surge through me. "I'm coming over," I said, hanging up quickly. I knew it was time to make a move, but I didn't know how far things would go this time. I rushed out of the office, my mind racing. The anger I felt toward my father boiled inside me like a storm waiting to explode. I couldn't believe he was still treating my mom like that, even after everything that had happened. The fact that he still thought he had control over us, that he could walk into our lives and make demands as if nothing had changed, was infuriating. When I arrived at the apartment, I found my mom sitting on the couch, wiping her tears away. Her eyes were red, and her hands were shaking. My heart sank at the sight of her. I had promised myself I wouldn't let her go through this anymore. But here we were. She was still trapped in his abuse, still bearing the consequences of his violent outbursts. "Mom," I said softly, walking over to her. She looked up at me, her face full of pain. "What happened this time?" She wiped her face and sighed, as though the weight of it all had finally become too much. "He came over asking for money again, Lucas. But when I told him I couldn't give him anything, he got angry. He started yelling at, calling me names, and breaking things around the house. I didn't know what to do. I thought he would hurt me. I clenched my fists, the anger swirling inside. My mom had been through so much, and I hated that she still had to deal with him. "I'm so sorry, Mom. This ends now. I'm not going to let him hurt you anymore." I promised myself that I wouldn't let him continue to destroy our lives, but I also knew that things couldn't stay like this. My mom had spent her whole life with Robert, and while I couldn't erase the past, I could help her escape it. I was determined to get her out of that house for good. The next few days were a blur of work and tension. I didn't tell my mom, but I started making plans to take things to the next level. ShopEasy had begun to pick up, and I was making more money every month. The app was growing, and I had expanded to a few more neighborhoods. It was still small, but it was enough to keep me going. I had a plan in place to start moving up, but my mind kept returning to the thought of my mother's suffering and the toxic hold my father still had on her. Then, one Saturday, I decided it was time. I had just closed a deal with a new store that had signed up for ShopEasy, and I was feeling pretty good about how things were going. That's when I received a call from my mother. She sounded out of breath, and there was fear in her voice. "Lucas, he's here. He's drunk again, and he's yelling," she said, her voice trembling. "Stay there, Mom. Don't let him in. I'm coming right now," I said, hanging up quickly. My heart was pounding in my chest. I could already feel the anger building again. I couldn't let Robert continue to control us, especially my mom. When I arrived at her apartment, the door was wide open. I could hear Robert's loud voice from inside, cursing and yelling. Without thinking, I stormed into the apartment, ready to confront him once and for all. As soon as he saw me, his face twisted in disbelief. "You? What do you want, boy?" he spat. His breath smelled like alcohol, and his eyes were bloodshot. "I want you to leave my mother alone," I said, my voice steady but filled with the fury I had been holding back for so long. "You don't get to treat her like this anymore. You don't get to hurt her, and you don't get to control her life. Not anymore." He took a step forward, his fist clenched, but I stood my ground. I wasn't going to back down. You think you can talk to me like that, huh? He growled. I'm your father. You owe me everything. No, I said firmly. I don't owe you anything. You've never been a father to me. You've been a bully, and I'm done with it. I'm done with you. Robert's face turned red with rage, but before he could say anything else, I stepped in front of my mom, blocking him from getting any closer. You need to leave. Now. For a moment, there was silence. Then Robert broke the silence with a sarcastic laugh. You think you can just kick me out of here? You're a joke, Lucas. I'm not a joke, I said calmly. But you are. And it's time for you to leave. He looked at me for a few seconds, trying to figure out if I was bluffing. But when he saw the determination in my eyes, he finally backed down. Fine, he said, his voice low. I'll go, but don't think this is over. As he turned and stormed out, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I had stood up to him, and more importantly, I had stood up for my mother. Mom, it's over. He's not going to hurt you anymore, I said, turning to her. She was standing there, still trembling, but there was a small glimmer of relief in her eyes. You did it, Lucas, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. You really did it. I pulled her into a hug. We're free now, Mom. I promise you, you're never going back to that house. You don't have to live in fear anymore. I knew that this was just the beginning. There was still so much to do, so much healing to be done. But in that moment, I realized that I had finally taken control of my life and my future. And I wasn't going to let anything or anyone stand in my way. The next morning, I drove to a real estate office and put down a deposit on a new house. I wasn't rich, but I had enough to start making changes, and that's exactly what I was going to do. My goal was simple. I was going to build a new life for my mom, a life where she didn't have to live in fear anymore. And I was going to make sure that Shop Easy succeeded so I could give her the life she deserved. The next few months were both the hardest and most rewarding of my life. I had made a decision. My mother would never live in fear again, and I would do everything in my power to make that happen. I was determined to keep growing Shop Easy, to make it successful enough that I could support her fully. My dreams were no longer just mine. They were ours. I moved her into a small apartment first. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Hers alone. The weight of living under Robert's control was gone, and for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of happiness in her eyes. It wasn't a mansion, but it was a safe haven where she could finally feel peace. For me, that was the beginning of everything. I was more driven than ever to make my business a success. Every day, I worked harder, learning more, refining Shop Easy, and doing everything I could to expand. At this point, I had a small team helping me. Kevin, of course, was still handling the technical side of things, and I had a couple of interns who helped me with customer service and outreach. We were working around the clock, and Shop Easy was growing steadily. It was still a modest business, but with every passing month, it felt like it was building momentum. One of the biggest milestones came when I managed to get our first corporate client. It was a big deal. The store, Joe's Electronics, had over 50 locations spread out across the city, and they were looking for a simple solution to help streamline their online orders. I approached them, pitched my app, and to my surprise, they were willing to give it a shot. That was the breakthrough I needed. The moment they signed on, I knew everything was about to change. But as the business grew, so did the challenges. We had to scale up quickly to handle the influx of new clients. Kevin and I spent countless nights tweaking the app, adding new features, and making sure everything was working perfectly. We were running on little sleep, eating fast food, and working through weekends. The pressure was immense, but I couldn't stop. Every time I thought about the struggles my mom had gone through, I knew there was no turning back. One day, I was sitting in my cramped office when I received a phone call from my mom. I could hear her voice cracking through the phone, and my heart immediately sank. Lucas, I don't know how to say this, but Robert, he came by again. He's threatening to ruin everything. I felt my blood run cold. What do you mean? What did he do? I asked, trying to stay calm. He said he's going to tell everyone that Shop Easy is just a scam. He's threatening to spread lies about you and your business, she explained. He's threatening to make things worse for us if I don't help him. A wave of anger surged through me, but I pushed it down. I couldn't afford to get emotional. Not now. He can't touch me or my business, Mom. He's done. I'm done with him, I said, my voice firm. You don't have to worry about him anymore. I'll handle it. I hung up, my mind racing with thoughts of how to deal with Robert. I wasn't afraid of him anymore, but the idea that he would try to destroy everything I'd worked for made my blood boil. I knew I couldn't let him get away with it, but I also knew that confronting him head-on could make things even worse for my mother. I spent the next few days meeting with lawyers and strategizing. I wasn't about to let him slander me or harm my reputation. I also realized that there was more at stake now than just my business. I was responsible for not only my success, but my mom's well-being, and I had to protect both at all costs. Eventually, I found a solution. I didn't need to confront Robert in person. Instead, I took a more calculated approach. I contacted a few people I knew in the industry, some old connections, and made it clear that if he spread any lies about my business, I'd have legal recourse. I had everything in order: contracts, proof of transactions, testimonials from my clients. Everything was above board. I also decided to buy the building where Shop Easy was housed, something I had been thinking about for a while. It wasn't a flashy office space, but it was a permanent home for my business. No one could threaten my success when I owned the space where I worked. It was a small step, but it made me feel like I was truly in control of my destiny. A week later, I got a call from my lawyer. Apparently, Robert had tried to contact some of the stores that were using Shop Easy and spread rumors about me, but my legal team had sent him a cease and desist letter, and he backed off. It felt like a huge weight had been lifted. I had won. With that out of the way, I could focus on what really mattered: growing Shop Easy and continuing to build a life for my mom. The next few months were a whirlwind of success and expansion. I brought on new employees, hired a marketing team, and started advertising in different cities. We reached new clients, and our app was gaining more and more users every day. I made sure my mom was always included in the process. I bought her a new phone, set her up with a nice tablet, and taught her how to keep in touch with me more easily. She loved it. I also took her out to dinner regularly, making sure she had the best of everything. I kept my promise to her. I would give her everything she deserved. One night, after a particularly long day, I was sitting in my office looking over some of the latest reports. My phone buzzed, and I saw a text from my mom. "Lucas, I just wanted to say thank you. I've never been so happy in my life. You've changed everything." I smiled to myself. I had done it. I had taken my worst fears and turned them into fuel for my success. I had built a life for my mom and myself that was free of the past's shadows. My business was thriving, and I was finally at peace. But as happy as I was, I knew this was just the beginning. I wasn't done yet. There was still so much more I wanted to do, so much more I wanted to build. But this time, I wasn't doing it alone. I had my mom by my side, and together, we would face whatever came our way. As Shop Easy continued to grow, I felt both a sense of pride and urgency. The business was flourishing, and with each new client, it felt like I was inching closer to the vision I had for myself and my mom. But the more successful I became, the more I realized there was still so much left to do. I had started to make a real name for myself in the tech world, but I knew that with success came new challenges, and I wasn't naive enough to think things would always go smoothly. I kept expanding, constantly thinking of ways to improve the app and meet the growing demands of the market. I had begun to hire a team of developers, marketers, and customer service representatives to handle the increasing workload. We were starting to make a real impact in the business world, and it felt amazing to see the fruit of all those sleepless nights and struggles finally paying off. But despite all the progress, there was one thing I couldn't escape: Robert. He kept showing up in my thoughts, even though I hadn't seen him in months. The anger and resentment I felt for him never fully went away, and I knew that deep down, I couldn't rest until I knew my mom was truly free from his grip. She had her own space now, but I wanted to give her more, something bigger, something better. I wanted her to feel like a queen in her own life, without fear of being dragged back into the past. So I set my sights on something ambitious. I started searching for a house for us, a real home, one where my mom could live without worrying about anything. I knew I had the money to do it now, but the task was daunting. I wanted the house to be something special, something that would make her feel safe and cherished every day. After weeks of looking at properties, I found it. A beautiful house just outside the city, with a large garden, a pool, and plenty of space for us to live comfortably. It wasn't just a house, it was a sanctuary. I could already imagine my mom sitting on the porch, enjoying the sun with a cup of coffee in hand, free from the chains of her past. The day I signed the papers to buy that house was one of the happiest moments of my life. It was the moment I could truly say that everything had changed. I wasn't just giving my mom a better life, I was giving her everything she deserved. Everything she had been deprived of for so long. This was a new chapter for both of us. When I took her to see the house for the first time, her reaction was everything I had hoped for. She walked through the front door, looking around in disbelief. This is for us?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Her eyes filled with tears as she took in the grand staircase, the spacious living room, and the beautiful kitchen. "Yes, Mom, it's ours. Everything you see here is for you," I said, walking over to her and hugging her tightly. "You've worked so hard your whole life. You deserve this." She cried softly into my shoulder, and for the first time in years I could see the peace settle in her face. She was finally home. The constant worry, the fear of what Robert might do next, had evaporated. We had made it, together. As we settled into our new home, life seemed to slow down for a moment. It was as if everything that had happened in the past was a distant memory. The stress of building my business, the pain of living with my father's cruelty, and the constant worry for my mom's safety were all behind us now. In that house, we could finally breathe. But even as things started to feel peaceful, I knew that my journey wasn't over. Shop Easy was growing rapidly, and I had plans to expand to other countries, reaching businesses beyond our borders. I was determined to make the app an industry leader, and I was ready to take on the challenge. With my mom now safe, I had more room to focus on the business. I could feel the fire inside me growing stronger every day. I started hiring more professionals to help grow the company, bringing in experts in marketing, finance, and operations. I even hired a full-time CEO to help guide the direction of the business while I focused on product development and scaling it internationally. It wasn't easy letting go of some of the control, but I knew it was necessary. I had a vision that went beyond what I could do alone, and I needed a team that could help make it happen. One day, while I was sitting in my office, I received an email from a big venture capital firm. They were interested in investing in Shop Easy. They had been following our progress for a while and were impressed with how we had grown from a small startup to one of the leading apps in the e-commerce space. I had always dreamed of scaling to this level, but I had no idea it would happen so soon. It was a huge moment for me, and it was the final confirmation that my hard work had paid off. The meeting went well, and within a few weeks we secured the investment. It was enough to take Shop Easy to new heights. Bigger offices, more staff, and the ability to develop more advanced features for our clients. Our expansion into other countries became a reality, and within the year, we had launched in several European and South American markets. Even as the business continued to soar, I made sure to keep my priorities straight. I never lost sight of what truly mattered: my mom and the life we had built together. We took vacations, went out to fancy restaurants, and spent time doing things we'd never had the luxury of doing before. I made sure she knew every single day that she was loved and appreciated. I took her to concerts, bought her new clothes, and even had a custom necklace made for her with her name engraved in gold. It was the least I could do for everything she had sacrificed. But there was one more thing I had to do. It had been almost a year since Robert had last tried to get in touch, and while I had moved on with my life, there was still a part of me that needed closure. I needed to confront him once and for all. So I did something I hadn't done before. I went to his apartment. When he opened the door, his face was a mixture of surprise and confusion. He looked disheveled, as usual, and smelled like cheap liquor. "What do you want, Lucas?" he asked, his voice rough. "I just wanted to tell you something," I said calmly. "I'm done with you. You don't get to control me anymore. You never did. And you're never going to hurt my mom again," he scoffed, trying to act tough. "You think you can just walk in here and talk to me like that? I'm not talking to you as a son anymore. I'm talking to you as a man who's finally free of your abuse. I've built something of my own, and I'm proud of it. So whatever lies you want to spread or whatever tricks you want to play, I'm not afraid of you anymore." His face twisted in anger, but I wasn't scared. I had already won. I turned and walked away, feeling a sense of peace that had been missing from my life for so long. That night, I went home to my mom, feeling lighter than I had in years. I looked at her, sitting there in our new home, and realized that all the sacrifices, all the late nights, and all the struggles had been worth it. We had finally made it, and nothing, no one, could ever take that away from us. The road ahead was still long, but I knew one thing for sure. I would never give up on my dream, and I would never let anything or anyone hold me back again.